All right. I am Sarah, and I am pressing record on this conversation here today to have a conversation about women, the lore of goddesses, human habit energy, and the traditions of winter solstice. And I am here with my friend Julia Hayes. I want to introduce her to you if you don't know her. And if you know her, you get to hear my way of introducing her. So I see Julia as a woman who is known in her community. She's a leader. She's a creative. She really creates all the time. I'm seeing this in the last few years that I've known her. Everything from gatherings of people to potent writings to handcrafts and works of art. She's a mother, a wife, and a business owner. And she's really fun to talk to and quite playful, which is why I felt compelled to record this conversation. So for those of you listening later, and to you, Julia, here today, welcome, and thank you for being part of this conversation.
I am so happy to be here, Sarah. Oh my goodness. Thank you for a beautiful introduction.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'd love to hear from you. What are you up to? Tell folks what you're up to at the community level and what you offer. So give an introduction of yourself at that level.
You know, it's hard to believe, but 6 years ago this month, I opened up Soul Center. And that just happened so spontaneously, and an advertisement for the space where Soul Center is came up for somebody to take over a lease for 9 months. And I remember thinking, oh, me, I should rent that space, without having any idea what I was going to do, without having any real business experience at all. And it was shocking. And yet it all just fell into place. I was like, yes, I'm going to do that. What am I going to call it? I'm going to call it Soul Center. And what is my mission? And here it is. And da, 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 da. And so then I've just been saying yes ever since. So what I'm doing now in Soul Center, and particularly in the background, with the background of the pandemic, is I have really simplified my focus, which is primarily working with people who are journeying on recovery. And so they're recovering from all kinds of things, substance use disorder, poor relationships with food, with all kinds of things, people trying to rediscover who they really are. And the approach that I practice is a Buddhist one. And the other thing I do a lot of is I teach a lot of meditation. And it's an interesting practice that continues to evolve for me, because my influences are primarily Buddhist, but I'm also highly pagan, and I have a very strong Celtic connection, which really lends itself to the return to the earth and my association with the earth, my rhythms with the earth. And those are folding into all of the meditations that I teach and offer. So that's what I'm up to.
This is why I like you. So I have been to Soul Center. I would call it a small studio space, a cozy studio space. And though I'm new to Spokane, when I describe where it's at, I say it's in Kendall Yards. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's in one of the It's in a historic building in Kendall Yards. It's in the Pelican Building, which was the original House of Charity of Spokane and St. Anne's Orphanage. And Soul Center is the parlor, was the original parlor. So it really does have a very intimate kind of homey feel. The building's been remodeled. The owner has done an incredible job with it, but it's got a fireplace, and it really has, I mean, if I were to throw a couple of couches in there, you'd think you were in somebody's living room.
It is cozy. I like being there. So you offer meetings and gatherings for people with going through recovery work, meditations, and tell me more. I know you also offer these creative pagan influence offerings too. What are those? How would you describe those?
So those are these spiritual exploration workshops and retreats. And it's worth saying that Soul Center came about because I was thinking about needing another space to the space of my farm, where I was holding and hosting community events for women, exclusively for women. And we were doing all kinds of wonderful work, really exploring the nature of the feminine divine and enacting it in ritualized ways. And we had been meeting on my farm for years, and I knew that many women wanted more practice. They wanted more opportunity to get together, rather than something once a month. And so I was just open to the idea of, well, maybe there's a space out there that I could rent and just see. And then boom, life has this undeniable way of this way. Yes, just say yes and do this. And so I did. So I've had circles of women. We talk about spiritual matters related to women. We create art together, pray together, offer blessings together, hold space for one another. So those are, I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, because I've attended a few of them, and as someone new coming in, someone who is, and I'll say I was new, but graciously invited in, and also guided by community. When I was first making contact with people in the Spokane community, I would be talking to someone and meeting someone, and they would go, "Have you?" It happened like 3 or 4 times. "Have you met Julia Hayes?" and after the first time, I was like, "No," and the third time, I need to. There's me paying attention. Yeah, so I've been at some of these gatherings of women, and felt the sacredness of gathering, and the magic and playfulness, the magic and playful opportunity for grown women.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also heard women, and you refer to these gatherings as part of a goddess community. And I, as someone who likes that word and has read the goddesses in every woman, and tied into goddess archetypes, I would love to hear you tell us, what is a goddess?
That is such a great question. And it's a loaded question. It's a big question. It's like a bazooka question. And I don't know that I really have an answer. My definition of a goddess continues to evolve. And what's fascinating to me is when I first started this community, this full moon goddess community, and I partnered with another woman who was really saying, hey, we need to have something for women. We need to have a place where women can gather and be in circle, because we don't really have, culturally, we're not doing those things anymore. We're not sewing quilts together. We're not cooking communally. So there are so many women who are isolated. And not only that, there are so many women who don't even know where their spirituality is, their divine nature is, because it is so contained in a male-dominated image and depiction. So I was very, very surprised to hear how many women were not very knowledgeable about the mythologies of the goddess. They knew basic Greek mythology and so on and so forth. But the caricatures of a goddess, she was typically white. She was typically girly and frilly, liked to wear dresses, had long, flowing hair, was heterosexual. So
you're describing Disney princesses,
right? Right. Exactly. So it was a very, very limited idea of what the goddess is. There was no room for the goddess to be the wilds of nature, highly destructive, and then at the same time resourcefully rejuvenating. There was no space in our mythology and the story for the goddess to be fully embodied and empowered. So it was just fascinating to hear how women would describe themselves and say, I'm not a goddess. And I would just think, well, what exactly do you think a goddess is? And it's a very limited perspective. So the goddess, to my mind, is everyone, including men. And the goddess is, for me anyway, and I'm still trying to figure out the language to describe it, but we hear so much about the word God, and we have all of the images that evokes. The goddess is simply its complementary opposite. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to have day, what's day's complementary opposite? Night. Life is defined by these pairs of opposites, by duality. And it's only when those two opposites come together that you have anything that's real and you have anything that's tangible. The way that I have seen our mythologies and our stories of God is we've only had this one idea, and it's male, it's masculine, it's all the definitions of what that is or what we perceive it to be, those social constructs. And we internalize them, we're dictated by them, we're governed by them. To bring forward the goddess is to simply bring forward all of those other aspects of us that are in everybody. So typically, stereotypically, the goddess has a predominant nature of being a nurturer. She is someone who is highly creative. She brings forward the play, the joy. She's all about bringing community together. So when I think about a hen and all of her little chicks, the rooster is the solo guy. And that's often what you see in the natural world. The females coming together, keeping the community held tight. That's a sacred feminine quality if you're going to be stereotypical. And that's not to say that men don't have that quality. It's just to say that that is predominantly what we see very naturally expressed in women. So when I think about goddesses now, I'm way more interested in what's the contemporary goddess? Who is she? And I'm not really sure I know. I think about her all the time. I think she has many, many, many faces, which is in and of itself a little blasphemous when we're talking about God, because there's apparently only one, which I think is completely nonsensical. And so to talk about the goddess as uh, multiple access points into what is divine, which is infinite in its expression. So the contemporary goddess, oh, I mean, just look at women today, look at men today, and there's your goddess.
Mhm. That's a good practice. I'll take that on. Yeah. Mm. I
And
love what you
it's really fun to say, Sarah, to people. Like I do this with my kids all the time. We'll be in line and it doesn't matter who it is. I'll just say, oh, you guys make way for the goddess. The goddess is coming through. And and people are like, wait, what? And even, especially men, it's so fun. And my kids have now learned they they'll shake their hands and they'll be like, oh, don't worry about it. She calls everybody goddess.
That's beautiful. That is so fun and playful. And yeah, I really enjoyed listening to you describe that and feeling it in my own self and recognizing my own observations in what you were saying. Yeah.
And our own limits. I think that's an important thing to say, is it's not only our definitions and what we're conditioned to think. We have to be willing to play with the idea that what we think and what we believe is historically incredibly limited. And this is why when women come into community, so many are dominated by feelings of undervalue, worthlessness. Where do I fit? I don't fit in anywhere. Where's my source of power? And so there's no, in so many of the practices of religion and spirituality that we see out there, there's so little for women that is strictly for women, about women, governed by women, inspired by women. There's very, very little.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cheers to more of that.
Right?
And opening up and I love the part that you said about multiple accesses to the divine. And I really like what you're saying here about like also recognizing limits in that and inhibitions about I've had my own and still am in my own journey with is it okay to believe that?
Yeah.
And checking in because there can be really there's some condemning belief systems in there about how I can witness the divine or believe in the divine or embody the divine because I'm a lot about embodiment and yeah and just beautiful conversation, and we'll get back to more about the goddesses. We're going to circle back to that. I wanted to segue into something I've heard you say multiple times in our recent conversations, and you talk about habit energy.
Mm.
And I know that I think the context that I've heard you say this in is in regards to recovery work and the recovery dharma work. And I, because of the things that I've learned through studying yoga, and when I say yoga, I don't just mean the yoga postures, I mean some of the stories and teachings and philosophies behind that. uh, but yoga talks about samskaras being grooves of conditioning and that over time the grooves get deep, because we're repeating patterns over and over and over again. And so that anytime we want to start something new, we have to not only get ourselves up and out of the old groove of conditioning, but then we have to wear a new path, with repetition and practice and acts of devotion, I think, when I think about my own practices. And and I'd love to hear your thoughts on habit energy and how you experience that and work with it in yourself, observe it in yourself.
I think the first thing that's essential to say is that we have to put everything about this conversation in the context of duality, because there's, again, a habit of assigning, if something is negative, it's bad, and if something is positive, it's good. And the nature of reality is that it's always both. And so when I think about like what you described about the groove, for example, and as I was listening to you, what came into my mind was that habit energy of the deer that come around my farm. And they don't just wander the property randomly. They follow their own trails and their scent trails, and they do very specific things, and so they wear down a pathway. Now, in and of itself, that can be pretty benign, and they're actually really beautiful to see when the prairie grass grows up. But if they're in a pathway that's going right through the middle of your vegetable garden, that's totally uncool. We don't, so there it is. There's the duality playing out. There's something beautiful about it, except where is it? Likewise, if you were in a forest and you're wandering around and you find yourself on a deer trail, there could be some relief if you're having to carve out a pathway all by yourself. If you come across something worn, it's a relief. You have some ease with it. So habit energy isn't always negative. Habit energy isn't always positive. So we have to make lots of space to hold both and to maintain a level of friendly curiosity to look at how is this habit energy affecting my life. Some of the things that you have taught that I have really appreciated about cultivating positive, good habits is about cultivating discipline, simplifying your life to do things that are really healthy for you over and over and over again. A negative aspect of that, which we all have, is, from the Buddhist perspective anyway, is the habit of wanting to avoid or reject anything that's uncomfortable and chase after only the stuff that feels good. So I have uncomfortable feelings. I'm not supposed to have uncomfortable feelings. Something's wrong with me if I feel anger or bitter or judgment or disappointment. And I don't know what to do about it. So I think I'll go eat some sugar. That would be my habit. Or for somebody else, I think I'll go have a beer. Or let's say you've had a terrible trauma in your life, and the memory of that keeps resurfacing, and you don't know how to hold it, and you don't want to hold it, and you don't know what to do with it. So you take altering substances so that you don't have to think about that and feel that. And you do that enough times, and before you know it, the substance becomes the source of the trauma.
And the source of comfort.
And the source of comfort. There it is. And then you know you're in a really difficult situation where the substance is no longer a comfort. it becomes the traumatic source, and it affects your relationships and how you work, and people get in trouble with the law and so forth. And that's where you have a clear indicator, a clear external indicator that something has gone awry. And I think one of the conditions of being human that shows up for virtually everybody in terms of habit energy, particularly in the West. I'm gonna qualify that. It's a Western mindset of we're awfully hard on ourselves. We are terribly judgmental toward ourselves. And we have this belief that there is some kind of way of being perfect in the absence of flaw. And that is one of the most detrimental ideas out there, because really what we're denying ourselves access to is what it means to be whole. And what it means to be whole, and this is what it means to wake up to our own divinity, is to recognize all the things that are just absolutely incorruptibly fantastic, and all of the things about us that are corrupt and flawed, and how those two work together constantly creating a resonance and a radiance that we are invited at all times to bring forward. But in the West, we're convinced, no, we've got to keep that under wraps. I've got to hide those parts of me that I judge to be wrong. And therefore, there's no way I can present to the world my whole self. The word we hear so often right now is authentic. And really that whole self. I prefer the word whole because I think it gives me access to holiness. And holiness is a sacred way of being in the world, and it is available to everyone. It is everyone.
I like that. And it's work. And it's work.
And it's work.
Because absolutely the judgment, the critic and the habit energy to accentuate the flaws and highlight the flaws, which brings me to I want to talk about the winter solstice and nature and ritual and how ritual and the patterns in nature can help us be easier on ourselves, can help us see all sides and to get out of some of these patterns that that have the energy to like pull us down. Yeah, so winter solstice, for folks who are farther from the equator, what is the spirit of winter? What are the gifts of nature? How can she help us take pause and interrupt the playing out of our patterns on a day-to-day basis?
You know, I don't know where in history we abandoned our sense of play, especially in ritual. And when ritual became this serious, I don't even know, the word that comes to mind is grind. Like, I just think about being dragged to church, and it was such a grind and there was no fun to it. It's like, when did it stop being fun? And so it's important to say that in all things, there should be a degree of fun. There should be a degree of play. Otherwise, we're not going to do the work in a sustained way. We're just not. And nature is incredibly playful. If you don't believe me, take time and watch the birds. The birds are so happy right now, especially if you feed them in wintertime. Solstice is in the northern hemisphere, is the time of year where we have endured increasing days of darkness. And so it's been this invitation to go inward. And for many people, certainly subsistive people, farmers who were dependent upon a good crop, this was the time of rationing. And so it could be kind of serious. But it was very introspective. This was the time of going inward, staying in your house, refining your tools, taking stock of your seeds, your clothes, your blankets, all of that. Traditionally skinning animals so that you would have warm furs, and all of that was happening during this period of time of darkness and cold, and there's no real reason to be outside. And it kept getting darker. We kept going more inward. And it's a highly sexual time. So there was a lot of wonderful sensuality going on this time of year as well. The solstice, the winter solstice, was that time of year where it is the absolute shortest day, longest night, the darkest time. And then after that, we are returning back toward the light. So we now know that it's all related to the rotation of the earth in relationship to the sun. And so coming back to the light, bringing forward light. So inward introspection, going into some of those dark corners, excavating some of those darker, ignored landscapes in our emotional heart and mind, adding some luminescence to that, bringing forward our own light to highlight that and see what we see, and then physically bringing forward light. So what I like to do is make sure that we use a lot of candles with any kind of ritual to start in the dark and to keep adding candles and keep adding light to really illuminate a space. I like to have a fire in the fireplace in celebration of the Yule Log, which was usually a great big giant tree, a great big giant bough that was brought in and meant to be able to burn all night long. So that was the goal. This was the time where historically many people, it depended upon the abundance of crops in the storehouses, but people would really celebrate the fruits of harvest and really come together and enjoy. And it was a community affair, lots of people coming together and sharing.
Mm-hmm. And when I think, of course, I don't know what it was like to be there in the past, and at a time when there was not so much artificial light and technology, and also like jobs, people's work was much more related to the natural world and to the cycles of nature. And so each time a new season came, there was a reason to take pause. It was required, and it makes me wonder if, with all the comforts that we have now, warm houses, light, technology, automobiles, we can just keep going. And if that has created a modern form of neurosis that is a pattern itself.
There's no question about it, Sarah. I mean, I just look at the grocery store and I'm like, why are they selling watermelons? Watermelon doesn't grow in the winter, and it's because we have planes and trains and trucks and stuff that ship these these wonderful fruits from southern states and sunny states, and that didn't used to be the way it was. So we're really out of sync with even our environment in terms of seasonal eating.
Yeah, it does. It detaches us from the cycles of nature. So as a practice of remembering and coming back, we can use some of these things that you spoke about, and these sacred days, as I'm learning, a word for them is the Sabbats, the winter and summer solstice, the spring and fall equinox, and then the quarter turns between.
Yep.
We can use them to take pause and shift energy.
And I really like that you recognize that it's a detachment from nature. And not only is it a detachment from nature external to us, it is detachment from nature internal to us, because we are not separate from the external nature. That's one of the delusions that is perpetuating in the contemporary world. Nature out there is separate from nature, my nature, when in fact we are one and the same. And we have spent so much time being disconnected to it that we don't even recognize the divinity of nature. And therefore, we're very lost regarding the nature of ourselves. And it's why we can do such terrible things to the external nature and not really think it affects us. And it does, deeply.
And yes, and ignore the continual impact that it has on us. Just the change of seasons, like to have less light and more dark, and it is impacting us. And so I'm really curious, this year more than ever, about how to inside my own body come inward and go slower, and create rest and pull my energy back to the roots, to go through that ritual. I think we have like 15 more days till solstice, and I'm really playing with it, and feeling into how I can do that.
I love that, Sarah. And I'm just thinking about the person who, might be listening, who has always wanted to do a solstice ritual and who doesn't know where to begin. And it's very, like, what book should I read? And my favorite book for anyone to read is the book that's written in every individual's mind and heart. You are the best source and guide for anything that you want to do. I could give you all kinds of ideas, but that comes from me, and maybe it would resonate with you, and wouldn't that be beautiful? But I think the most truly, and kind of getting back to the goddess, I think the most celebrated way of bringing forward the goddess in everyone is to begin cultivating enough space that we can trust our own imagination. We can trust our own, well, I don't want to bring in, pine needles or, pine boughs or whatever. I want to bring in an aloe vera plant. Yes, do it. Hang on just 1 second. I did not. You can grab some out of my wall. Teenagers, navigating teenagers. So good. So yes, and that insecurity that happens in people is the fear of I'm going to do something wrong. And there is no wrong. There's no, well, there would be wrong if you were going to light just on fire. Like, I'd be like, oh, really? I don't think you need to do that. Maybe that's a misstep. Yeah. But in reasonable elements of what it is an individual wants to do, there's this, the limit is one's imagination, truly. And for Yule and for solstice, truly the thing to keep in mind, and there are several things, but the one that comes to my mind is light. So what is your light? And because we have to learn how to bring together pairs of opposites. If ever we're going to ask, what is your light? We have to be willing to explore, what is your dark? If you're going to so easily enjoy the light, how can you enjoy the dark? That's the invitation. So light and dark are wonderful, wonderful tools and things to play with. The other thing is looking at, what is the earth doing? The earth is very still right now. So the motivation in one's own nature is, how are you creating stillness? And how are you creating subtle movement? What is the subtle movement within you that isn't seen? Because underneath the earth, just a couple of inches down, maybe 6-7 inches down, there's a whole lot happening down there that we don't see. And the same is true for us. What's happening? How are we nurturing ourselves? What is all that internal subtle movement? And stillness and rest, how are we getting that? And how are we partnering that with gentle movement, ease of movement? And I think the other thing, the last thing I would encourage listeners to contemplate when bringing forward a solstice ritual is to look at how the snow creates a blank canvas, and how the solstice time of year is a very forgiving time of year. Like your slate is clean. Clean your slate. Create a blank canvas. Take time to reflect on the things that went well and the things that didn't go well, and make preparations for things to be done anew, to make a new painting of your life right on the canvas of this snowy day.
Yes, that's beautiful. That is so good. Begin anew. New crops.
Yes.
Potential for new seeds.
Yes. And this isn't about the spring newness and planting. This is about, creating enough space where you're just observing. If anyone has ever done anything creative and had a blank canvas or even a blank page upon which to write, you sit with it usually for a minute, and you wait for some kind of divine stir, and then you begin. And it's whether it's an outline with a pencil or a couple of doodles on the paper, something happens, something stirs, and none of it's really all that clear or direct, and it doesn't have to be. That's the thing that's so beautiful about winter. It's a very opaque time. There's a lot of space for things to not be completely clear, but to have enough room to dabble, to do different things.
So good. So good. Yes. So thank you. Thank you for sharing all those pieces and ideas. And it feels like permission.
Yes.
To play with this, with the nature of winter inside myself. And I know we're getting close on time here and towards wrapping up, but I promised that we would circle back to goddesses.
Yes.
Because I know that you have told me you are giving birth to some contemporary goddesses, including one that is coming forth this month. And I'd love for you to share about that.
Oh, I'm so glad you're asking about it. It's really an exciting thing I decided to do. So I'm sick of ancient goddesses. Love them and I'm sick of them. There's that duality, because I am convinced that none of those goddesses were actually created by women. I think they were created mostly by men. Men were the only ones educated historically and who could write. And they were created to serve men and to be of service to men. And even though they, there were aspects of goddesses that were positive for women, I just thought, where are the goddesses written by women? Like, I would really want to know that. And I, like so many things, I'm like, well, what's stopping me from giving birth to these goddesses? So I have, for 2021, created a new goddess every month. And I just use what's happening in nature where I am in the northern hemisphere to guide me. I get very quiet and very still, and I think about, who is she? I'll do research, a little bit of research, and I'll try to find obscure mythologies of goddesses in some corner of the world. And then a name will come. So in 2018, I introduced a goddess in one of my gatherings, and her name was Wanjawa. And Wanjawa is spelled Wonjawa. And Wanjawa is like a battle cry to me, like, Wanjawa, just shout her name, be empowered, Wanjawa. Yes. And Wanjawa is the goddess of alchemy, which is the perfect word for this time of year. We're really blending a lot of things in the winter time, and we're mixing foods, spices are coming around, all of that. And the alchemy of that is so mysterious and beautiful. Wanjawa's name comes from 3 words that for me are the ultimate defining words of God, and because I don't use the word God, and really pointing to a deeper understanding of what it means to have access to the divine. And those 3 words for me are wonder, joy, and awe. So Wanjawa is the combination of those 3 words. I'm also bringing forward with Wanjawa a mask ritual, because in 2013 for the solstice, I had everybody make masks, because I really wanted to address, especially for women, the masks we put on and we hide behind and we project. And I really wanted to challenge that idea of treating ourselves and the masks we wear as something really beautiful and really positive, and to give ourselves permission to hide behind a mask and to feel really safe back there. And to also remember that when we're in a good place and we're putting on a mask, whether it's leadership, it's the good mother, it's the whatever it is, we're also projecting a mask that is glittery and sparkly and capable of mirroring, so that other people, when they encounter us, even with a mask on, can see themselves more clearly. So we are a walking, breathing mirror where people can take a look at the mask we have, and it can be literal or it can be metaphoric, but we are grounded in our own sense of spirit and our own sense of soul, that whatever mask we're wearing is actually a mirror for others. So that's what Winjawa is going to bring forward this year. She's going to bring forward alchemy, the alchemy of light, the alchemy of mirroring and projecting, the spirit of hiding and being safe and protected and guarded by that. The idea of being maybe even a little bit secretive and mischievous behind that mask. What you got going on back there? Yeah, that's what I'm bringing forward.
Oh, Wanjawa.
Winjawa.
Wanjawa. It's so many of the things that you described, and the spirit of who she brings forth is, again, that permission giving piece. And some of those things could have just as easily been like, bad girl Sarah, bad girl to have a mask, bad girl to project, bad girl,
Right?
bad girl to hide. And all of that was more like, no, it's okay. Again, that duality and having compassion and playfulness and acceptance of it.
And there are going to be plenty of people out there who are like, oh my God, now a solstice ritual looks like A, B, and C, and it's always looked this way, and this is the tradition, and yawn. That's great. However, that's one way of doing it, and that's great. And there are 7 billion people on the planet. And I would love to hear about 7 billion access points into celebrating solstice, celebrating the divine, being the embodied divine. That's what I want to know. That's what I want to see. That's what I celebrate.
It's so bright.
It's
so bright. I was thinking of that song, if everybody lit just one little candle.
Right? Exactly. And yeah, I mean, and we spend so much time snuffing out our own stuff. And there are definitely elements of and aspects of unskillful people out there that are all too happy to snuff out your stuff. And they are no fun to play with. And just no fun.
So choose your own playmates.
Choose your playmates. Yes. Yes. And create space for people to be a little wobbly. Like I can't tell you how many people I've met that don't quite believe it. Like you can't be this happy. You can't be this playful. You can't give yourself that much permission. And so it takes some time for people to get out of that conditioned groove. There it is. There we're bringing it back. And maybe they're only able to peek their head up a little bit over the edge. And then eventually they get their head and neck above the edge and then can make a first step. So it's also about cultivating space for everybody to show up as they're able to.
Yeah, and just show up.
That is the for recovery, that is the biggest thing. Show up. Keep showing up.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you for showing up here.
Oh, Sarah, thank you for having me here and letting me have this conversation. It's really one of my favorite things to talk about and to bring forward. And one of the things of Soul Center is I originally thought it would be only and exclusively for women. And slowly, men have made their way in. And I have gained so much by practicing with and celebrating the sacred masculine as a complement to myself, and them receiving the sacred feminine as a complement to them. So it's really been this wonderful alchemy, this wonderful complementary sharing where we're both enriched.
Mhm. Beautiful. So where can people find out more information about Soul Center and these amazing offerings that you have?
So you would go to our website. It's souls, SOULS, soulscenter.com.
Okay.
And it lists all of our offerings that are usually offered both online and in person. We have limited space in Soul Center, and with COVID restrictions, we're keeping it even more intimate, more protected. But there's obviously the sky's the limit for Zoom and being online. But the one thing that's really beautiful is there are these audio recordings on the website. So if anyone wants to have access to more meditation practices, there's lots and lots of them on the website to listen and to get to stillness and gain some quiet.
Right. Beautiful. So on your website, people can find things that they don't even have to interact with other people, and they
Yep.
can find resources that might be helpful to them. And
Yep.
they can also find all the information about in-person events or joining online meetings.
Yep, exactly, Sarah. And next year we'll see what happens. I'm hoping to have a couple of retreats. We've talked about more cello and yoga events, and oh my gosh, yeah.
I'm excited. Yes. I'm excited to play in the Soul Center space and to keep these conversations going
Yeah.
about all the whole wheel of the year and nature's cycles. And I just thank you for showing up and sharing yourself, and for all the work that you do to help others and to be yourself so that you can birth ideas and love and care for the people you do. I honor
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a wonderful time. What a wonderful conversation. Wanjawa.
One Jawa.
Oh.